I couldn't believe my eyes as I sat in the middle of a crucial business meeting. My partner's phone rang, and to my horror, my wife's name appeared on the screen. Without hesitation, he answered, greeting her as though it was the most normal thing in the world. "Glad you called," he said with ease. "Last night was amazing. How about dinner at 6:30? My heart sank, and I was paralyzed in disbelief. But my revenge? Oh, it was swift, and it would be ruthless. The boardroom felt colder as I sat there, the vast city skyline stretching out before me. The towering concrete and glass structures seemed to mirror the success I had worked so hard to achieve. The deal I had just sealed with Olivier wasn't merely a business milestone. It was proof that we had made it to the top, together. But beneath my triumph, something felt off. Isabel, my wife, had become increasingly distant over the past few months. I had brushed off the signs at first, telling myself it was just a phase. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The late nights at the office, the sudden desire for solitude, the uncomfortable tension whenever I asked the simplest questions. It all pointed to something I couldn't ignore anymore. Despite my suspicions, I trusted Isabel completely. She wasn't just my wife. She was my partner in everything. From the moment we met, it felt like fate. Her laughter, her brilliance, her beauty, they captivated me. We had built a life together, a life I thought was unbreakable. But trust, I soon realized, is a fragile thing. As I sat at the table, reviewing the final documents for our upcoming project, that gnawing feeling of unease intensified. Olivier, my trusted business partner, leaned back in his chair, flipping through his phone carelessly as I signed the papers. He seemed too relaxed, too comfortable, but I dismissed it at the time. After all, we had been friends for years. What could possibly go wrong? Then everything shattered in an instant. Olivier's phone buzzed loudly across the table, the sound slicing through the silence of our conversation. Without a second thought, he picked it up, and his face lit up as he saw the caller ID. "Isabel," he answered with an all-too-familiar tone. "Hey, I'm glad you called. Last night was incredible. How about we meet for dinner at 6:30? I'll make the reservation at that place you love." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. At first, they didn't fully register, but then they crashed into me with brutal clarity. My wife, the woman I trusted more than anyone, was having dinner with my business partner, and the way Olivier spoke to her, so casual, so intimate, sent a wave of nausea through me. I glanced at him, but he didn't seem to notice my shock. He was far too comfortable, far too casual. To him, this wasn't a betrayal. It was just another conversation. "Last night was incredible," he had said. Isabel had heard those words, and I knew the truth in an instant. They were involved. The crushing reality of their betrayal hit me with full force. I had been in shock, trying to piece together how this could happen. But now the truth was undeniable. Olivier was my best friend, and Isabel was my wife. They were the two people I thought I could count on, and yet here they were, tearing my world apart. As Olivier ended the call, he casually set his phone down, wearing a grin that made my blood boil. "You know," he said, looking at me with a shrug, "I never thought it would end up like this, but you were always so focused on work." Isabel needed someone who could keep up. His words struck me like a physical blow. No regret, no remorse, just a nonchalant admission that he had been sleeping with my wife, as though it were no more than a business deal. I stood up, my body trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. The man I had called a brother was now the man sleeping with my wife, and she, my wife, had been orchestrating these secret dinners, setting up meetings, living a double life behind my back. I couldn't wrap my mind around how they could betray me like this, how they could do this to us. My chest tightened, and the words barely escaped. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I whispered, my voice shaky but full of disbelief. Olivier, completely unfazed, shrugged. "Man, I didn't mean for things to get this complicated, but we've both been in this for a while now. Isabel, Well, you know how she is. She's always gone after what she wants. Each word he spoke pierced me like a blade, and the silence that followed was heavy with the weight of his casual admission. My trust was in pieces, scattered across the room, and I wanted to explode. I wanted to shout, to rage, but deep down, I knew now wasn't the time. This wasn't how I would regain control of my life. I had always been the type to think ahead, to be strategic. I wasn't going to let them off easy. They would feel the full force of what they had done to me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Instead of confronting Isabel right then, I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, my lawyer's. "Danielle," I said, my voice tense. "I need a divorce. I'm done." Her response was calm, almost relieved. "Of course, Alexandra. We'll start the process immediately." That was the moment. The moment I knew my life wasn't just about Isabel and Olivier anymore. It was about me, and they would regret crossing me. 2 days later, Isabel was home when I returned. The look on her face when she saw me standing in the doorway, stone-faced and unreadable, was one I'd never forget. She tried to smile, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Alexandra, you're home early," she said, her voice high-pitched and forced. I didn't answer right away. I walked inside, my steps slow and deliberate. "Isabel," I said, finally breaking the silence, "we need to talk." For a moment, she looked confused, but then her expression shifted. She knew. She knew I had found out. I leaned against the wall, my stance cold and unwavering. "I know about you and Olivier." Her face drained of color, and she stepped back, shaking her head. What are you talking about?" I didn't let her off the hook. "I heard everything. The phone call last night. Dinner at 6:30. My voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "How long has this been going on?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled. She was caught, and I watched her crumble before me. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was no longer the person standing before me. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was time to let go. "I'm divorcing you," I said quietly, my decision final. "And I'm taking everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabel stood frozen, her hands trembling, unable to say anything. I turned and walked away, leaving her there, but not without purpose. The following months blurred together. I threw myself into the divorce process, meticulously plotting every move. It wasn't just about taking Isabel's comforts away, it was about making them both pay. But I didn't just want to hurt them. I wanted them to feel the full weight of what they had done. I used every connection, every resource, every strategy at my disposal to bring their world to its knees. When the final move came, it wasn't just personal. It was calculated, precise, and flawless. The divorce dragged on for months. Isabel fought me every step of the way, trying to cling to the life I had built for us, but she had no idea how much power I had. The legal strategy, the financial resources, the connections, I had it all in place. Every time she made a move, I was one step ahead. Olivier tried to intervene once, but I made it crystal clear he was in no position to help her. Through it all, I couldn't help but think back to when things were different. When Isabel and I would walk through the park, hand in hand, laughing and talking about the future. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. The memories of our future together hurt now, knowing they were forever tainted. The life I had built with her was destroyed over a fleeting affair. And what cut deeper was that she thought she could simply walk away from the wreckage without consequence. But I had learned painfully that when betrayal runs as deep, there's no place for forgiveness or sentiment. My heart had become impenetrable, and nothing would stand in the way of me getting the justice I deserved. The day of the final hearing arrived, and I was prepared. In her desperation, Isabel attempted a last-ditch effort to settle. She tried to keep the house, the lavish lifestyle, and even begged for a second chance. But I was firm. "No," I told her coldly. "You betrayed me. You betrayed us. Now, you'll pay for it." The judge's gavel struck, and with it, Everything Isabel had fought to keep collapsed. The assets were divided, and I made sure she received as little as possible. The mansion she adored was mine now, and I sold it. The art, the expensive jewelry, the vacations, all of it, the life she had built by betraying me with my business partner, was gone. The court order came down quickly, and as I walked out of the courtroom, there was no sense of satisfaction in seeing her defeated. There was no joy in knowing her world was now reduced to a broken version of what it had been. I had taken everything from her, but the real sting was that she remained the woman who had betrayed me, and that, in itself, was enough. While Isabel scrambled to deal with the aftermath of our divorce, I turned my attention to Olivier. He had been the one to shatter my trust the most, and I wasn't done with him yet. At first, I considered confronting him directly, maybe showing up at his office and demanding an explanation, but I realized that approach wouldn't work. He needed to feel the consequences of his actions the way Isabel had. He had to suffer professionally, where it mattered most to him. The business world was where he thrived, where he felt untouchable. It was where he believed he could manipulate everyone to his advantage. But now, the tables had turned. I had everything in place to make sure his empire came crashing down. I started by undermining his professional dealings. I reached out to his business partners, the ones he had kept hidden from me. I made sure they knew about the affair, about the lies he had spun. Slowly, his reputation began to tarnish. Deals he had been banking on to advance his status began to fall apart. One after another, investors pulled out and clients turned their backs on him. He had no idea why his success was slipping away, but soon enough, he found himself trapped. Olivier called me several times during this period, his voice frantic. He threatened me, begged me to stop, but I didn't respond. The damage had already been done. Eventually, his downfall came in a spectacular fashion. A major contract he had been courting for months was canceled after a damning article about his personal life was published. It was written in such a way that there was no denying the truth. Everyone in the business world now knew about his betrayal, and Isabel's affair was laid bare for all to see. His reputation was shattered. Olivier lost everything. His business, his credibility, and his social standing. As I stood back and observed everything unfold, a quiet satisfaction washed over me. Olivier had thought he could take my wife, my life, without facing any repercussions. Now, he was paying the price for his actions. In the months that followed, I started rebuilding. The pain from the betrayal never completely vanished, but it became easier to handle. I took long walks through the city, clearing my mind and reflecting on the path ahead. While I had lost much, I had also gained something valuable, a strength and resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I had survived the deepest betrayal. I began focusing more on myself, dedicating time to the things that truly mattered. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the chaos of my marriage and career. I threw myself into work, but not just any work. Projects that sparked inspiration, not just the ones that brought in money. I also took time to process everything that had happened. Isabel's betrayal, Olivier's lies. It had tested me in unimaginable ways, but it had also taught me something profound. I would never again let anyone take me for granted. Once trust is shattered, it can never be mended. I did have a brief moment of pity for Isabel, perhaps even sympathy. She had thrown away a life she could have had, but in the end, she made her choices and I made mine. As for Olivier, I heard occasional whispers about him, how he was still attempting to rebuild his reputation, still fighting to salvage the business he had carelessly destroyed. But I knew something he didn't. No matter how hard he tried, he would never recover what he had lost. His betrayal had consequences that could never be undone. Time passed, and life began to find its new rhythm. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first entered that boardroom, full of trust and hope. But I wasn't the broken man Isabel and Olivier thought I would become. I had rebuilt, stronger than before. All that was left for me was to move forward. In the quiet moments, walking alone to the park or sitting in my favorite cafe with a book, I realized something crucial. Revenge had never been about inflicting pain. It had been about reclaiming my power. It was about taking back my life. Isabel and Olivier were now part of my past, a chapter that had closed. Looking ahead to the future, I knew one thing for certain. I was free. The final thought that lingered in my mind was a quote I had come across once. The greatest revenge is living well. And in that truth, I found peace. Thank you for following this journey. If this story moved you, please leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Lauren's Story. I've noticed that over 80% of you watch these stories, but haven't subscribed yet. One simple click helps bring more powerful stories to your screen. By subscribing, you're joining a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a gripping new tale. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means the world, and together we'll keep these stories alive.